the second time after having my son, I was hit with debilitating anxiety where I left the house, I tried to do some normal things, and I got hit by something that I just, honestly, I can only describe as kind of feeling like I was plagued. My brain was completely overtaken by heavy, intrusive thoughts, and I had zero control. And it got so bad that I just couldn't function at all. I couldn't shower, I couldn't cook, I couldn't eat. Hi guys, I'm Louise Thompson, and I am a mother, an author, and a TV personality. I'm here today with Women's Health, and this is my body, my story. How am I feeling in my body today is a very, very relevant question, because I've undergone so many bodily changes recently, but also over the last 3 years. And I suppose before that, I'd always been pretty lucky, and I'd had a very kind of a great relationship with my body, and my body hadn't changed a lot. I'd had a fairly consistent weight, shape, size, and things have changed a lot since going through the trauma of having my son. I experienced bodily changes that I never thought would happen to me. It actually took me 2 years to get back to a place where I recognized myself again. And the crazy thing about all of this, and I honestly, I kind of am sat here and it feels surreal because I don't know whether to laugh or to cry, but I finally got to a place where I had my old body back, and then I ended up facing more physical challenges, and I ended up having to have an operation where I had to have my colon removed. So I'm very recently dealing with a lot of new changes, and the crazy thing is I think I'm actually adapting pretty well. And even though I might sit and look like I'm sad, the resilience that I have developed, having been through what I've been through, puts me in really good stead for my current situation. Like, I feel actually really strong, and equally, like, nothing will ever be as hard as the kind of the mental turmoil I've been through. So I can deal with physical challenges, and I really respect my body for being so strong and for kind of surviving everything that I've been through. I now see it as a carcass that just holds loads of organs and keeps me alive. And that's a huge evolution, because for a while, I guess I was seen as someone that did have, not the dream body, I mean, that would be really arrogant to say that, but I have been the cover of Women's Health, thank you guys, twice, and that was a huge honour and a really pivotal moment for my career, so I was so grateful to do that. And I would work out 5 days a week. I suppose I was known for having abs. I had great abdominal muscles, and I loved strength training, and all of that has changed. I've kind of reached this new chapter, and I think that actually how you see your body changes a lot anyway after you have kids. And I'm 34. my priorities have changed, so I have a family, and I don't necessarily kind of flaunt my body in the same way that I used to. I don't spend a lot of time in bikinis or bodycon dresses, and yeah, this is the new me, and I feel confident. Growing up, I had a pretty good relationship with my body, and I think that that's largely down to my parents, and I thank them for that, because we never spoke about bodies, really. It was never highlighted. I had an incredibly good relationship with food, and my parents were both very active, so I was always very sporty, and I was eating like a monster steak and chips from the age of 5. Things got a little bit harder when I went to boarding school. There was an element of comparison, and I went to an all-girls school, and there were people that struggled with eating disorders. I'm very fortunate. I've never suffered disordered eating. I've always been a really consistent weight. I'm very short. I'm 5 foot. Probably, like most people think that I'm lying, like just 5 foot. And I've always been about 50 kilos, and I'm the lightest that I've ever been now. And I guess that you asked me about my childhood, that takes me back to one time when I was at school, and we used to have weighing and measuring at boarding school, which I think is really, really unhealthy, and I hope that doesn't exist anymore. And I remember thinking, oh, well, that feels like a challenge. That feels like something that then people are going to come out and compare numbers on. And so thankfully only for a day, I think it might have been 2 days, I thought, oh, well, what happens then if I diet and I eat a restricted diet for 2 days and then I get weighed and measured and then maybe I will be a slightly lower weight. Anyway, thankfully it never went any further than that. But I remember what my weight was back then, and my weight is now lower than that, and I would have been 12 or 13, and that is worrying for me, and that's just as a result of the surgery that I've been through. And you know, it's not something that I want to kind of dwell on hugely, and it's not a medical problem, but I guess it puts me in a place now where like a big priority of mine is gaining strength and getting back again to a place where I'm at my healthiest. And that's me just being really, really honest. I spoke about sort of my anxiety, and I guess I would now reflect back on that and call that kind of mild anxiety when I shot the Women's Health cover back in 2017, and I have a whole new perspective on what, you know, the spectrum of anxiety now, and I speak about this a lot in my book and kind of go into a lot of detail about the various different kind of anxiety disorders that I've struggled with, and including generalized anxiety disorder, PTSD, a bit of postnatal depression and dissociation. And I've always been someone that's got a lot of anxious energy. I've got a lot of energy. I'm sort of, you know, I can't drink lots of coffee, I'm shaky, and that, you know, was reflected in my not so much teenage years, but yes, working in television was not that easy for me. Like, it didn't necessarily come that naturally. I'd probably be better off working behind a computer somewhere on my own. For the second time after having my son, I was hit with debilitating anxiety where I left the house, I tried to do some normal things, and I got hit by something that I just, honestly, I can only describe as kind of feeling like I was plagued. My brain was completely overtaken by heavy, intrusive thoughts, and I had zero control. And it got so bad that I just couldn't function at all. I couldn't shower, I couldn't cook, I couldn't eat. I would eat, but I didn't know how to prepare food for myself. You know, I would open and shut the fridge, and I couldn't make sense of the world around me, and that is completely different to not being able to get up on stage and give a presentation. It's amazing, really, actually, that I'm sat here today doing this, and it has taken me a long time to get to this place because I couldn't do anything. I would just stare into space for the best part of a couple of months, and it really, you know, had a huge impact on every area of my life. My relationship, obviously I couldn't work for the best part of a year. It was really, really debilitating. And I'm just really, 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 really grateful that I'm not that person anymore, because I wasn't sure that I would ever get out of that phase because I didn't have anything to go by. It was really important for me to write this book for a number of reasons. Firstly, I'm going to be really honest, selfishly, I was doing so much writing anyway. It was one of the only things I could do and work through my feelings that way when I felt like I couldn't actually vocalize what was going on in my head. And then I started typing, and I found it hugely beneficial. Despite like the book and the place I am now and everything that I've learned, I would undo it because I've lost out on precious, precious time with my child that I will never get back, and it was absolute torture. But at least, you know, some good hopefully will be able to come from it. That's something that I cling on to. Pregnancy following miscarriage is not the same as pregnancy without that weight over you. So I did find the 9 months very challenging. And again, you know, I do talk about this. I have a chapter on this in the book because it is a big part of my life, and obviously it's kind of leads into the anxiety towards the birth. The first 3 months are obviously very, very challenging because you're not supposed to technically tell anybody, and you're kind of clinging on to this secret, and you want to be able to share the exciting news, and you don't know how. I think you just don't know how you never know really how it's going to end. I look back and I think there were definitely anxious behaviours that I thought were normal at the time. You know, I was documenting things a lot, making notes a lot, and I did pay for a lot of private scans. I don't blame myself. I mean, I think a lot of people that I know who have walked the same path as me have done exactly the same thing. And I wish that the journey to get pregnant had been different and easier, and that it hadn't been so kind of overshadowed by the miscarriage before. And you know, I can't lie, it wasn't a hugely traumatic miscarriage. I have friends that have suffered far, far worse. And I do think that even having the support of them was really helpful. I think you kind of have to cling on to whatever you can find that's going to keep you on the right path. I spent a lot of time speaking to friends who had been through a miscarriage with their first and then had a successful pregnancy after that. Those were the people that I honed in on, and I spoke to them all the time, and I'd ask them questions, and I just wanted optimism, and that massively helped me. I felt great in the second trimester, kind of, which is typical, I think, like a lot of people do. Suddenly got energy. So a month before I gave birth, I was involved in a house fire at my mother's house where we were living while we were doing a renovation at home, and it was, again, a new experience unlike anything that I'd ever witnessed before. I don't think until you've been in a fire you can really imagine what it's like, until you see or can't see, because the smoke is so thick that you can't see your hand that close to your face. You can't breathe. It smells like pure chemical poison. It was really, obviously, like incredibly scary, and I don't even really think I had a chance to sort of properly process that before then giving birth. It felt like, you know, there was one thing just piling on top of the other. It's funny because even before doing this morning, I'm stood in the mirror at home and I'm imagining talking about everything that's happened to me, and it comes flooding back, and it caused like a physical reaction in my body where I have so much adrenaline shooting from my stomach up to my heart, which again takes me back to an awful time when I was recovering, where I thought that was going to cause me to die. And it's still really, really tough to talk about the actual medical trauma without going into an immense amount of detail. And I'm mindful as well that I don't want to scare people. And I really wanted to have a C-section, and I was denied that. And I ended up having to have an emergency operation where I lost an immense amount of blood. And then I had further complications, which meant that I lost even more blood later on. And the trauma, I think, stems from witnessing my body losing a lot of blood at home and really believing that I was going to die continuously until I was put to sleep, when I was begging to be put to sleep, because I couldn't. What happened to my head in that state of just survival felt so torturous. It was agonizing, which is really odd because it's not, you wouldn't think that it would be a physical pain, but it is. So a lot to have to go through, and wasn't able to then process obviously any of that properly and for a very long time, and that's, I guess, what caused the PTSD, and then kind of meant that my recovery was so long, and hopefully not something that many people will have to relate to, but it's still weird to me that it happened. It's just odd. Genuinely believing that you're going to die. Not just thinking it, like genuinely believing that you're going to die. It's something that you will never be able to unlearn, like, but you learn to work through it. And I am now in a really good place, so that's kind of the main thing, is that it's upsetting, you know. It is, of course, it's emotional. It triggers a lot of emotions, but I'm like really, really well equipped now to handle everything and just to live a really normal life. It's how do I get people to understand the complexity of a condition like PTSD when I can look a certain way and be fine one day and then really struggle the following. With regards to the PTSD, I naively thought that was something that only applied to war veterans, so I had seen things on the news and thought, oh, but if someone comes home from battle, they're home, they've lived, they're safe, they've got their family around them, they've got so much to be grateful for, they don't have to go back to war, like, they're the lucky ones, like, can't you just forget it? But I was really naive when it came to mental health. I genuinely just thought, like, oh, just bring in nice things into your world, like happy thoughts. And there's a lot of this narrative out there that kind of not belittles mental health, but just some people that maybe haven't suffered think that mental health is as easy as just having a nice bath or a cup of tea, and that's going to fix your problems and make you better. Just have a nice conversation with someone, just like stand in front of the mirror and recite some positive affirmations. That's not really that's not going to fix your problems if you're really, really in the trenches. And the thing with PTSD is it's a memory processing problem. So it's that something is actually trapped in your brain. If you imagine your brain is like one of those fancy orange machines where all of the oranges go through and make this little juice at the bottom, PTSD is like a watermelon comes along. So the oranges are all the memories, and like day to day there might be some slightly bigger oranges, some things that are a bit harder to process, like you've had a fight with a friend, or you've got sort of anxiety from whatever it might be. But then when something is so traumatic that it puts you in like a major state of threat that you really think that you're going to die, like a watermelon comes along, and it completely clogs up the machine. The memories are just scrambled. Nothing's coming out the other side. Like nothing is making sense. You can't get any juice out of it. And the only way really, I suppose, to fix the machine and fix your brain is you have to find ways to break down that melon into little chunks, and then slowly it will start to work again. And then you can start thinking about the normal problems that people have in their day-to-day life. So the diagnosis for me came, I tried some therapy fairly early on, probably 3 months postpartum. It was maybe even earlier, because I couldn't face being trapped like that for a day longer, let alone like a week, let alone a month. And I did have people message me to say, oh, I've been through X and it took me 9 months to feel normal again. That was one of the points that I had to kind of shut out like a lot of the external influences, because I'd cling on to any data information. I started this therapy, wanted to go for it, needed to fix myself, and it was too soon and it made me much worse. And then I had to kind of try and just live for a little bit at home, and then yeah, I felt ready to do therapy, I suppose, properly a year down the line. And there I met with different people along the way and had some good experiences, some terrible experiences. Some people tell me that I was too sick to treat, a whole mixture of stuff, and everybody told me that I had PTSD. The worst part about that for me was the fear that it was something that I was going to live with forever and that it couldn't be cured, so there's no quick fix. I think that's the scary part about receiving a diagnosis like that. But the other side of me that likes to be an analytical brain, I like answers, so I like to be educated on things. It was reassuring being able to learn more about something. So it was good and bad, I suppose. I tried many, many different things. Many of the things that worked really well for me were things that were free, because some of the stuff can come at an enormous expense and is just not sustainable. And I wanted to make sure that in the book I provided people with helpful tools that weren't going to cost the earth. And I think that even the fact that therapy is so expensive is really frustrating, and the NHS obviously waiting lists and stuff are not good enough. To talk about something I currently do just to ground myself, I tap. So I have tapping routines for different things, and that can quite quickly take me out of a really weird headspace into a much safer headspace, and it really helps with things like sleep. No one wants to hear that it's the time and talking is actually the best thing. My relationship with medication is very personal to me. I know people that have had really positive experiences with antidepressants. Unfortunately, because the trauma was so severe at the beginning and at the time that I started taking a lot of these medications, including antipsychotics and a whole kind of concoction of stuff, if I started taking something now, I would be able to recognize the difference that they'd made. My life was such a mess that I couldn't tell what was causing what. So I didn't have, not to say that other people have a blank canvas to start with, but there was no continuity. So it wasn't as though I'd felt a certain way for a month, or things had kind of progressively got worse, or I didn't know my arse from my elbow. I didn't know what was normal at all. So it was such a long process, and I am incredibly sensitive. I've spoken quite openly before about my sensitivities to alcohol, and I don't drink coffee and that sort of stuff. I'm a sensitive soul. I'm really sensitive to stuff, and I think it's a very individual thing, and it might have helped. It was a last resort, and it was something that actually initially, I was prescribed over a Zoom call because I basically was just so out of it. They were like, this might make you be able to think straight for a second. When I first left the hospital, we didn't have any mirrors in the house for a while, so I didn't actually see myself, and that was quite discombobulating. Then when we did have mirrors, that was quite scary, because I would latch on to things that I would see in the mirror, whether it was weird veins under my tongue or some capillaries, around my knees having come out of the shower, and I'd think, I'm gonna die again. I really didn't recognize my body at all, and it looked very different postpartum, and I wasn't really prepared for that, to be honest. I think, you do see people that leave hospital, models, I shouldn't follow these models, that come out 2 days post-birth and in like little cycling shorts and a crop top. And I kind of actually thought that was going to be me, because why wouldn't it? I don't know. And I was enormous for me. I didn't look bigger than when I was pregnant, because that would be a lie, but I shouldn't have actually been as swollen as I was. It was amplified by all of the trauma and the inflammation inside me, but it was very, very scary. And I then would use that as a metric of wellness. I wanted to make sure that all of the swelling and stuff was going down. And I do remember having a moment where I looked in the mirror once and I was wearing like a little Calvin Klein grey bralette. I hate that word bralette, it just sounds ridiculous. But I was wearing one of them. And I did turn around and I saw my back, and I saw some muscle in my back, and it was really, and this is quite early on, and I did recognize myself. It took a very long time to be able to recognize my body. My relationship with my son was not normal. I don't know when the sort of turning point really was. I kind of probably changed the scale every time I talk about it, because now I really think that we have a normal relationship. So I'll say it's taken 2 years. Like, now we're in a really good place. But I think that is the crazy thing about motherhood. It's what everyone says, but the love never stops growing. So it's always evolving, and you just get to know someone better. And I even it's ridiculous, but I even feel the same way about my dogs. I love them more the more I get to know them. And our start was very tricky. I didn't have any of the skin on skin. I didn't really recognize that I had a child. I was in pure survival. So selfishly, my priority was all me. And I don't feel guilty or weird saying that, because it just didn't feel like a choice, and I'm not a bad person and I'm not a bad mother. I did everything that I could to get better for him. And even when I didn't feel like I knew him or loved him, I would say that I did, to convince myself that that was the plan, because I knew that that's what, even though a lot of my thought processes were incredibly irrational, I knew that that is what that is what Louise would have wanted, and that is what I need to work towards. So I would say, Brian, I just want to get better for Leo. I didn't, and I'll admit that. But now, thank goodness, I kept going, because we really do have a fantastic relationship. Ryan did bring him into the hospital, and I didn't really acknowledge that he was there. I think it's hard anyway for some people to love someone that you don't know. People talk about this amazing, wonderful experience. The first time I saw him, I did instantly recognize something in myself, and I felt a kind of a burning inside me that felt very different, and that was special. But I think it's hard to really, really love someone that you don't know. That's my honest opinion. And and I didn't, just speaking very, very honestly, and I know people that do hugely connect with their baby when they're in their tummy. I found it very hard to connect with a baby that I couldn't visualize at all. I didn't know what they were going to be like, what their face was going to look like. I found it really challenging. Some people message me on Instagram and they're like, I can't believe that, you're saying that your poor son's going to grow up and blame himself for everything that happened. But I don't actually believe that to be true at all. I've never resented Leo. I don't really associate Leo with the birth, because I didn't have all of the normal birth stuff. I sort of feel like mine and Leo's relationship started from, he was birthed into my life about 6 months postpartum. That's kind of when he came into my space. I think my subconscious was scared of this, of Leo, because when he would cry, I did feel very triggered, and I would dissociate. They say it takes a village to raise a child, and I think in our case, we really needed that village. The funny thing is before I had Leo, I'd said categorically to Ryan that I didn't want anyone around. I didn't want his parents staying. I didn't want any visitors for 2 weeks. I just wanted it to be me, Ryan, Leo in our little bubble, just never leaving the bedroom, just like snuggling and having a joyful time. And I felt really strongly about that. And, you know, obviously that idea like fell apart because I wasn't even at home for quite a long time. So we really relied on family, and largely Ryan to coordinate people visiting the hospital. My parents are divorced. Trying to figure out how we were going to make that work was probably not easy for him. And also it was sort of at the end of lockdown and all the COVID complications, so actually trying to negotiate with the hospital to allow extra people to visit they were lenient with us because of the circumstances being so dire. We had help. Sometimes we had some people help us at night because I couldn't do anything at night, and I was going to bed at 6 p.m. and I was sleeping for 12 hours. My body really needed sleep to recover. I couldn't physically wake myself up. I couldn't get up. I was just healing. Ryan and me have been tested in ways that I didn't know possible. I really do think if we can get through this, we can get through anything. We've been at rock bottom. It's awful, really, what trauma can do to a family dynamic. He fell out with everyone in my family, to keep it brief. Everybody in my family fell out with everybody. I mean, like the trickle-down effect was cataclysmic, and we've managed to piece things back together, and that's the main thing. But it's been really hard, and you know, Ryan and I have hated each other at times, and now we love each other, I hope. It's really weird because I would have felt really rubbish about having a stoma bag attached to my body 4 years ago, and it would have been the most life-changing, dramatic thing that had ever happened to me. But because of the birth trauma, this feels much more manageable. But it is really significant. I mean, I've been really ill, and I have had major surgery, which was an emergency, and it was awful spending time in intensive care and waking up with something that resembles a sea anemone that's hugely swollen sticking out of your stomach that I hadn't had a chance to research before at all. It wasn't elective. There's a big difference as well between having an elective surgery and an emergency surgery. One is a choice and one is taken out of your hands. And the fear that's associated with an emergency surgery, when you don't know the surgeon, you can't research how many operations someone has done, you don't know where it's going to be, you don't get to meet the team of the people doing the anaesthetic before. I genuinely just didn't know. I didn't feel like I was going to wake up again. I thought, like, I'm the cat that's had 9 lives, and this is going to be it. Like, this is going to be the final thing. And then obviously I did wake up, and it is a surgery that they perform a lot. And it turns out that there are 190,000 people walking around this country with a stoma bag attached to them. And you know, I guess it's part of me now, and this is all part of me, and it's part of my journey. But I just still maintain that I feel really grateful to be in good health. And actually the hope is that having this, by removing the entire of my colon, which I've had confirmation literally yesterday that it really needed to come out because it was disgusting, and it was the entire colon that was really inflamed. So it was definitely my best option. Hopefully that means that now for the rest of my life I can live flare-free and really working on like building back up my strength and feeling better. And I do feel good. Like, I feel good today. I really do. And the Stoma team are amazing. I've seen them every week since the surgery. I think they're quite shocked by how well I'm responding to the change. At the end of the day, it's like, I'm wearing like a grey bum bag. Like, it's just an accessory. And I've adapted really quickly. It's funny, like Leo will be like, oh, when we're lying in bed, and I'll be like, what? Like, mummy boo. I'm like, how do you know that? How were you so intuitive and you're only 2? I mean, I'm focusing on the good. Like, I've been too scared to drive, been in an immense amount of pain, and the pain is inconceivable, and that really is the worst thing. And it is scary, and I had to go back into hospital because I had complications post-surgery and some horrendous experiences, like, you know, people pulling drains out of you where something's still attached inside because they haven't clipped the right bit of like metal wire, and you know, some really horrendous things that are both mentally and physically painful. But this is like the beginning of the rest of my life. I can drive now. I can't, the food thing is the main stumbling block for me, and the kind of the most depressing thing, because I just love food. Like, everyone knows that. I love a roast. I love all food, and I've had to basically eat a liquid diet for a few weeks, and then I've pretty much just eaten like chicken and rice for several weeks, and that's been really, really, really bad. Because I then had gastritis. Basically, in the hospital I was prescribed 3 ice creams a day. They were pumping me full of like lots and lots of fatty, dairy, creamy things. And anyway, like I kind of had like a reaction to that. So yeah, so it's been gruesome. And I haven't eaten a vegetable in months. That's awful. Like, I don't feel good about that. But today I had a blueberry. I had 2 blueberries. I mean, I'm having like lots of like Rice Krispies and like toast and other things, so I'm not eating, but it's just that I've had to completely do a 180 with my diet for now, and then I'll weave things back in. But yeah, I just haven't been able to eat fruit, vegetables, no fibre, which we're all taught is the thing that's really good for our digestive system. So yeah, unlearning and then relearning and finding my new normal. I actually was diagnosed with an inflammatory bowel disease 6 years ago, so pre having Leo, and it had been really easy to manage my whole life prior to having my son. Occasionally I'd have to take medication, but it never affected my standard of living at all. Like, I've always pretty much been like a bundle of energy and been able to do everything that I've wanted in life. Like, I was losing blood was my initial kind of trigger symptom to then go and get something checked, and that was what led me to the diagnosis. It got much worse postpartum. There's 2 things. I think there's obviously the stress of all the PTSD. Stress is really bad for this condition. Also, your hormones, like your whole kind of chemical, everything changes after birth, and that can cause women who haven't had like a significant hemorrhage or really bad birth trauma also can have a bad flare up after having a child. So it sort of was almost like a double whammy, I guess. I've made the right decision. I've had confirmation on that now, but it's something that, you know, will obviously play on your mind, because everybody's story is different. Speaking to any woman about fertility is a very, very sensitive subject. I feel slightly desensitized because of all of the trauma that I've been through, maybe compared to some people. I'm so grateful to have one healthy child, that despite wanting a big family, because a number of my best friends were one of 5, and I loved spending time with all of, you know, their big brood growing up, and I thought it was like more people to play 40-40 with. Like, it's just, you know, that's just not the reality for me anymore. And, you know, that I do have other options. I do still have eggs, I have ovaries, I could adopt, and there are lots of things that I can research into. I think surrogacy is very complicated in this country, but it's not something that I would rule out long term. But given everything that I've been through, you know, in this abdominal space, again, fairly recently, I can't put my body through any more stress. And even the idea of freezing eggs for fertility preservation is, I just had got to a place where I feel normal up here, and that is my priority. I kind of want to like work for a little bit and enjoy the life that I've created before jumping to always wanting the next thing. I'd spent a lot of my life before all of this always focusing on that next thing, and always thinking that having more, achieving more was going to be the answer to finding more happiness, and it's just completely incorrect. I absolutely don't need more kids. I'm really, really lucky to have Leo. He's like the best, coolest kid, and he has great cousins and loads of friends, and we're all doing really well. So just slowing down and stripping life back, and I just wrote a list of things that make me happy, and I was like, these are the things that I want to be doing as much as possible, and surrounding myself with people that live cool, interesting lives, like a fabulous new agent and assistant, and like I love spending time with, I don't know why that makes me feel emotional, but spending time with like them and people that like are just doing fun stuff. Like, I've been living under a rock for a long time. I went to a friend's house not that long ago, and her husband mentioned something current affairs-y, and it was really topical, and I had no idea what they were talking about, and he honestly was like, oh my god, like, I was actually really embarrassed. I was told not to kind of heavy lift for 3 months, so that's been really hard, obviously, having a young boy who's sort of 15 kilos. Like, I have now started to kind of like figured out a way to like be able to swing him onto me and then get him up onto the changing mat if I need to change his bum. But I've got things like potty training to look forward to. Movement wise, I'm loving doing just a lot of like meditating and lying down. And I even asked, again, the nurse yesterday, permission as to whether I was allowed to stretch, because I have these moments where I think, you know, I'm no expert. I don't know what's going on inside. I don't know how long everything in there takes to heal. And that's the most important thing. She literally looked at me and was like, absolutely, you can stretch, Louise, you're a complete idiot. Stretching, I can do some Pilates. I'll have to just adapt some exercises. Walking, and I will get back. I'm never going to be a runner or like a heavy cardio gal, but I really am looking forward to being able to do more strength stuff, because that's just bringing me back to me, and that feel really good. I was like a bit of a rare case because what happened to me was really significant, so I did have a little bit of extra care, but the problem is that so the hospital was Chelsea and Westminster, one of my local hospitals. That's where I gave birth. But then because I don't live in Chelsea, I wasn't able to access any of the mental health help that I needed afterwards. So I was really like then just kind of thrown into the wilderness and expected for the people, I guess, Ryan, my family, to dig around and figure out like what we were gonna do. And then I worked with a crisis team, but also then I had help from Hammersmith Hospital and Charing Cross Hospital. And it felt like a complete minefield. There was no coordination of care. And when you're really in a bad place, you just aren't able to sniff out those resources. Like, you can't do it yourself. I'm incredibly lucky. I have a partner and I have family that live in the same country as me. It's something I think about all the time, even when I was recently in hospital. Anytime I've called an ambulance and been let into hospital, what would I do with a child at home? What if I was a single parent of 5 with kids? I'm in a place now with the book coming out where I want to research a lot more about birth trauma and what people's rights are. I would like to talk more explicitly about them. There are things that women don't know about. You can change consultant. You can ask to meet the whole team that's going to be performing an operation. It is your right to have an elective C-section. You can change hospital if you want to. None of this is stuff that I knew about. I was very, very naive going into my birth. I'd only done the NHS NCT classes online. I've had a birth debrief now with the hospital, a couple of different appointments because it's taken so long, and there's still some stuff that needs to be unraveled. There are some things that were some kind of shortcomings, which are hopefully things that they can work on. I mean, one of the things is really simply listening to the mother and listening to whether they feel safe to leave the hospital, because I couldn't before I then basically had to come back in. I was discharged after 5 days before I then came back in, and I shouldn't have been sent home. I couldn't do anything for myself. I couldn't stand. Like, I was in excruciating pain. So it's listening to the mother and, you know, assessing whether they feel fit to go home, but also listening to pain levels. I mean, there are other things, blood transfusions and other more complicated stuff, but some, like, people that are who actually do have big profiles, who I never would have known had gone through a birth trauma, have come out of the woodwork and messaged me. People have given me their numbers saying I've got complex PTSD. I had no idea. So the book is called Lucky, and it's not an easy decision coming up with a name for a book, but I'm so happy with this choice because I do feel incredibly lucky. And I guess that's for many, many reasons. I mean, I'm lucky I live in this country. I'm lucky I live close to a really amazing hospital. My relationship with the hospital is like a double-edged sword. I mean, it's complicated, but I am so grateful for some of the care that I have received there, life-saving care. I'm lucky I didn't get on a flight to go to St Lucia earlier last January because, you know, that I might not have survived that. I'm lucky that I have a beautiful son, and I'm lucky that I am supported and I have friends, and I'm a very, very lucky person. And if you'd asked me that 9 months ago, a year ago, I mean, I was still in the headspace where I was feeling like the unluckiest person that I knew. I mean, obviously luck it's all relative, isn't it? But yeah, I'm working towards getting to a place where I actually feel lucky that all of this happened, because I'm living a much better life now because my perspective has changed, and I kind of appreciate things a lot more, and I live in the present, which I've hated, because living so in the present where your thoughts consume you is just awful. But I am that annoying person that I'll wake up and be like, Ryan. Not all the time, but I will sometimes look at it and be like, we're alive, yay. I've met a lot of people in the hospital. And like a lot of people that I never would have met over the last few years. Like there's people that are much, much more unlucky than me, and people that don't get to leave the hospital. And that, like, you know, that for me breaks my heart. But I'm leaving with, you know, looking like this, which isn't too bad. Got my limbs, got my sight, got my smell. Like, yeah, it could be a lot worse. Thank you guys so much for listening to my episode of My Body, My Story. I hope that you enjoyed it, and also that something that I spoke about resonated with you and maybe even helped you.